The real estate agent looked at Evelyn Parker and asked a question she never expected to hear. "Mrs. Parker, are you ready for the final walkthrough before closing?" Evelyn slowly placed her coffee cup back on the kitchen table. "Closing for what?" The agent looked confused. "The sale of the house." For a moment, Evelyn thought she had misunderstood. This was her home. The same home where she had raised her son. The same home where her husband, Robert, spent 40 years building a life with her. She had never agreed to sell it. She had never met this agent. And she had never scheduled a closing. But the paperwork on the agent's clipboard had her address, her name, and a signature that looked very familiar. At first, Evelyn wondered if someone had made a decision about her home without telling her. But the truth was more complicated. The document she had signed days earlier was not a final sale agreement. It was connected to a larger plan involving the property, a plan Michael had started discussing before Evelyn ever knew about it. Michael had moved the process further than Evelyn realized, without ever having a real conversation with her about what those steps meant. Evelyn did not argue. She did not raise her voice. She simply asked for a copy of the documents. That afternoon, she placed the papers on her kitchen table and looked at the signature line again. Just days earlier, her son Michael had sat across from her and said, "Mom, you need to trust me. This is just to protect you." And Evelyn had signed. "Hello everyone, I'm Eleanor Brooks. Over the years, I have listened to many family stories about love, trust, and the moments when someone realizes a decision was made without them. Today, I want to share Evelyn Parker's story. What makes Evelyn's story difficult is that the person holding the pen was not a stranger. It was her son. But before we talk about that signature, we need to understand what this house meant to Evelyn. Because this was never just about four walls and a piece of property. Evelyn Parker was 72 years old when Michael first suggested making changes. She had lived in that small Indiana home for more than 4 decades. The front porch still had the wooden chair where Robert drank his morning coffee. The hallway still carried the pencil marks where Michael's height had been measured as a child. The kitchen cabinet still had the small scratches from years of family dinners and holiday mornings. After Robert passed away, Evelyn stayed because leaving felt like leaving a part of him behind. So when Michael called and said, "Mom, I don't want you living alone anymore," she heard something every mother hopes to hear. She heard that her son still needed her. She heard that he wanted to take care of her. She did not know then that the first thing Michael wanted from her was not a suitcase. It was a signature. And that signature would become the beginning of the hardest conversation Evelyn had ever had with her own family. 3 days before the real estate agent stood in Evelyn Parker's kitchen, Michael had arrived at her front door carrying a folder. He did not come with bad news. He came with coffee. That was what made it harder for Evelyn to question him. Michael walked into the house he grew up in, looked around the living room, and smiled. "Mom, this place hasn't changed much." Evelyn smiled back. For a moment, it felt like the old days. The son who used to run through that hallway was standing in front of her again. But Michael was not there to talk about childhood memories. He was there because he believed it was time to make changes. "Mom, I worry about you being here by yourself." Evelyn placed 2 cups of coffee on the table. "I've been managing." "I know you have," Michael said quickly. "That's not what I mean." He sat down and opened the folder. He explained that after Robert passed away, there were too many things Evelyn had to handle alone. Bills. Repairs. Future decisions. He said he wanted to make things easier. And to Evelyn, those words sounded like love. Because after losing her husband, the quietest moments were often the hardest ones. The house was still full of memories. But the person she used to share them with was gone. So when her only son said he wanted to step in, Evelyn did not hear control. She heard care. Michael turned the folder around. "It's just a simple document," he said. "Nothing complicated." Evelyn reached for her glasses. She looked at the pages. Most of the words felt ordinary. Legal words. Words she did not fully understand. Michael tapped the signature line. Right here, Mom. And Evelyn signed. Not because she was careless. Not because she did not value her home. She signed because she trusted the person sitting across from her. That was the part Michael did not understand. The signature was never just ink on paper. To Evelyn, it was an act of faith. But the next few days would show her something she had never expected. Sometimes the hardest moments in a family do not begin with someone shouting. They begin with someone making a decision for you and calling it help. Stories like Evelyn's remind me of something many families struggle with. And I have learned that trust is a beautiful thing. But trust without understanding can leave a person standing in the middle of a familiar room, wondering how everything changed. For Evelyn, the question was no longer whether Michael loved her. The question was whether love had slowly turned into something she never agreed to. And that was the question she would have to answer next. After Evelyn signed the document, nothing changed overnight. And that was what made it difficult. There was no argument. No warning. No moment where Michael looked different. Instead, the changes arrived quietly. A new conversation here. A new decision there. Small enough that Evelyn almost convinced herself she was imagining it. The first time she noticed it was during a repair conversation. Evelyn had planned to replace the old kitchen faucet. It had been leaking for months. Nothing serious. Just one of those little things every homeowner eventually handles. When she mentioned calling a plumber, Michael stopped her. "Mom, don't worry about that. I'll take care of it." Evelyn smiled. "Thank you, but I can handle a faucet." "I know you can," Michael said. "I'm just trying to help." The words sounded kind. But something about them stayed with her. Because lately, every time Evelyn made a decision, Michael had a way of replacing it with his own. The next week, Lauren rearranged the living room furniture while Evelyn was out buying groceries. When Evelyn came home, her favorite chair was gone from beside the window. "Where did my chair go?" Lauren looked up from the boxes she was organizing. "Oh, I moved it. The room feels more open this way." Evelyn stood quietly for a moment. It was not about the chair. She knew that. It was about the fact that nobody had asked. Later that evening, Michael showed her a list of things they wanted to update around the house. New paint. Different lighting. Some changes to make the home more practical. Evelyn looked at the paper. Then she looked at her son. "Michael, when did we decide all of this?" He paused. "We're just trying to make things easier for everyone." Everyone. That word stayed in Evelyn's mind. Because she noticed something. The conversations were always about what was easier for everyone else. Not what she wanted. Not what made her comfortable. Not what made her feel at home. Over the years, I have noticed a pattern in family stories like this. I have learned that family conflicts rarely begin with one dramatic moment. More often, they begin with small choices. A picture moved. A room changed. A decision made without asking. Each moment seems harmless by itself. But when those moments add up, a person starts to wonder where their own voice went. Evelyn still wanted to believe Michael was only trying to help. She wanted to believe her son was simply worried. But then, one afternoon, she found something on the kitchen counter that made her stop. It was another set of papers. And this time, Michael was not there to explain what they meant. The second folder was sitting on the kitchen counter when Evelyn came home that afternoon. It was not there when she left. That was the first thing she noticed. The second thing was the name printed at the top of the first page. Her own. Evelyn placed her groceries down slowly. She did not open it right away. For a few seconds, she simply stood there and looked at the papers. Because something inside her had changed. A few weeks earlier, she would have called Michael immediately. She would have asked, "Son, what is this?" And she would have waited for him to explain. But now she had a different question. Why was this placed here before anyone talked to me? Evelyn picked up the folder. Inside were pages filled with words she recognized but did not fully understand. Property. Authorization. Financial decisions. Terms that sounded ordinary when spoken quickly. But Evelyn had lived long enough to know something important. A person does not need to understand every word on a page to understand when they were not included in a decision. That evening, Michael came home and found the folder on the table. He looked at it. Then he looked at his mother. You found that? It was not a question. Evelyn studied his face. Michael, what is this? He took off his jacket and placed it over the chair. It's just part of organizing things. Organizing what? He paused. The house. Your future. Everything you'll need. Evelyn felt something tighten inside her. Not anger. Not yet. Something quieter. A feeling that she had been standing outside a conversation about her own life. My future, she asked. Yes, Mom. We're trying to make sure you're taken care of. Evelyn looked toward the window. Outside, the flowers Robert planted years ago were beginning to bloom again. She thought about all the years she had spent taking care of everyone else. And now someone was telling her that they were taking care of her. But they were doing it without asking what she wanted. Stories like Evelyn's reveal something important about family relationships. I have noticed that one of the hardest things for people to recognize is when help slowly becomes something else. Because real help begins with a question. What do you need? But decisions made for someone often begin with a statement. This is what's best for you. Evelyn did not accuse Michael of anything that night. She did not throw the papers back at him. She simply asked him one question. Michael, did you read everything before you asked me to sign? He looked away for just a moment. And that small moment gave Evelyn an answer before he ever spoke. Because sometimes the truth does not arrive through words. Sometimes it arrives through hesitation. And for the first time, Evelyn wondered if the signature she gave out of trust had become something she needed to protect herself from. The next morning, Evelyn did something she had not done in a long time. She called someone for advice. Not Michael. Not Lauren. Someone who had no reason to tell her what she wanted to hear. Evelyn called Robert's old attorney, David Collins. For nearly 30 years, David had helped Robert with business documents, property questions, and the kind of paperwork most families only think about when something changes. When Evelyn arrived at his office outside Indianapolis, she placed the folder on his desk. I need you to explain something to me, she said. David opened the first page. Then the second. He did not speak right away. That silence made Evelyn nervous. Is something wrong? She asked. David adjusted his glasses. Evelyn, before I answer, I need to ask you something. Did anyone explain this document to you before you signed it? She looked down. Michael said it was to protect me. David nodded slowly. That is not the same as explaining it. Those words stayed with Evelyn. Because that was exactly what had been bothering her. Nobody had forced a pen into her hand. Nobody had raised their voice. Nobody had told her she had no choice. But somehow, she had still ended up signing something she did not fully understand. David continued reviewing the papers. He explained that some of the language involved future decisions about the property. Nothing happened immediately. But the document created a level of involvement that Evelyn had never agreed to. Evelyn listened quietly. Then she asked the question that had been sitting in her mind for days. Why would my son do this? David did not answer quickly. Instead, he closed the folder. Evelyn, that is a question only Michael can answer. And that was the hardest part. Because Evelyn did not want to believe Michael had acted without caring. She remembered the little boy who used to bring her wildflowers from the yard. She remembered the teenager who called her after his first long drive alone. She remembered the man who stood beside her at Robert's funeral. A person can do something hurtful and still believe they are doing the right thing. That was what made family situations so difficult. The line between care and control was not always easy to see. The most painful moments in families are often not caused by strangers. They happen when people who love each other stop listening to each other. Evelyn left David's office with the folder in her hands. She did not have all the answers. But she had one thing she did not have before. A question. And sometimes, a question is the first step toward finding the truth. That evening, when Michael came home, Evelyn was waiting at the kitchen table. The same table where she had signed the paper. But this time, she had questions ready. Evelyn waited at the kitchen table until Michael walked through the door. She had placed the folder in front of her. Not to accuse him. Not to start a fight. She simply wanted the truth. Michael noticed the papers immediately. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Evelyn asked, "Michael, why didn't you tell me what was in this document?" Her son took a deep breath. "Mom, I knew you would worry." That answer surprised her. Because it meant he had already made a decision. He had decided what she could handle. He had decided what information she needed. Evelyn looked at him carefully. "Why would I worry if everything was fine?" Michael sat down across from her. "Because you always think about the worst possibility." Evelyn was quiet. She thought about that sentence. Because for most of her life, she had been the person who prepared for problems. She paid the bills. She planned ahead. She cared for Robert during his illness. She raised Michael. She was not someone who avoided reality. She simply wanted to understand what was happening inside her own home. Michael reached for the folder. "Mom, I'm not trying to take anything from you." Evelyn looked at him. "I never said you were." And that was true. She had not accused him. She had only asked questions. But sometimes, the reaction to a question reveals more than the answer. Michael explained that he was trying to make things easier. He talked about the future. About emergencies. About making sure Evelyn would not have to handle everything alone. Some of his concerns were real. Evelyn knew that. She knew aging brought changes. She knew life did not stay the same forever. But there was one thing she could not ignore. Helping someone and deciding for someone were not the same thing. Many families struggle with this quiet misunderstanding. One person believes they are helping. Another person feels like they are slowly losing their place in their own life. And sometimes, both people believe they are right. That is what makes these moments so painful. Because the hardest conversations are not always about money or property. Sometimes they are about respect. Evelyn did not get the answer she wanted that night. But she noticed something else. When she asked about the document, Michael did not explain the document first. He explained why she should trust him. And that difference stayed with her. The next morning, Evelyn made a decision. She was going to read every page of that document herself. Not because she stopped loving her son. But because she finally understood something. Trust does not mean giving up the right to understand. And what Evelyn discovered on those pages would change the way she saw everything. The next morning, Evelyn Parker sat alone at her kitchen table with the document in front of her. This time, there was no Michael beside her. No explanation. No voice telling her where to sign. Just the pages. And for the first time, Evelyn read every line slowly. She kept a notebook beside her and wrote down every word she did not understand. Because this was no longer about trusting someone else to explain her own life. This was about understanding it herself. After nearly an hour, Evelyn noticed something that made her stop. Her name appeared several times throughout the document. But so did Michael's. She turned another page. Then another. The more she read, the more questions appeared. The document did not say that she was losing her home that day. But it gave Michael a level of involvement that Evelyn had never discussed with him. Never agreed to. Never asked for. She placed the papers down and looked around the kitchen. The same kitchen where Michael had eaten breakfast before school. The same kitchen where Robert had repaired the cabinet door near the sink. The same kitchen where she had believed family decisions would always be made together. Then her phone rang. It was David Collins, the attorney she had visited the day before. "Evelyn, I reviewed the documents again," he said. "I think you should know there are a few things you need to discuss with Michael." Evelyn held the phone tighter. "Things like what?" David paused. "Things about who is making decisions, and why." Those words stayed with her. Because that was the question she had been avoiding. Why? Why had Michael felt the need to arrange things before talking to her? Why had he believed signing first was easier than explaining first? "I have learned that family stories are rarely about one single moment. They are built from small choices. A conversation avoided. A question unanswered. A decision made quietly. And sometimes, by the time someone notices the pattern has already changed their life." Evelyn did not want to believe Michael had planned to hurt her. That thought was still too painful. Instead, she tried to understand him. Maybe he was worried. Maybe he thought he was protecting her. Maybe he was afraid of what would happen if he did not step in. But understanding someone's reasons does not erase the impact of their choices. That afternoon, Evelyn placed the documents back into the folder. Then she did something she had never done before. She locked the folder in a small drawer beside her desk. Not because she was preparing for a battle. Not because she had stopped loving her son. But because she finally understood that love and trust also require boundaries. And before the week was over, Evelyn would discover that the document was connected to a problem Michael had never mentioned. A problem that would explain why he was so determined to take control of the future. Evelyn thought the document was the biggest surprise she would discover that week. She was wrong. The bigger surprise came from a conversation she was never supposed to hear. It happened on Thursday afternoon. Evelyn had gone outside to water the flowers near the front porch. The same flowers Robert planted years ago. The same flowers Michael used to pick when he was a child. As she walked back toward the house, she heard voices coming from the kitchen. Michael and Lauren were talking. Evelyn stopped before opening the door. Not because she wanted to listen. Because she heard her own name. "We can't keep waiting," Lauren said. Michael answered quietly. "I know." Evelyn stood still. She had never heard that tone in her son's voice before. Not anger. Not confidence. Something closer to pressure. Lauren continued. "If this doesn't happen soon, we're going to have a bigger problem." A few seconds passed. Then Michael said, "I'm trying to handle it." Evelyn stepped away from the door. She did not hear anything else. She did not need to. Because suddenly, the questions she had been carrying all week started connecting. The papers. The changes around the house. The decisions made without her. For the first time, Evelyn wondered if the reason Michael was rushing was not only about helping her. That evening, she waited until Michael was alone. "Michael, are you having problems?" Her son looked surprised. "What makes you ask that?" Evelyn looked at him. "Because I feel like there is something you are not telling me." Michael sat down. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he admitted something she had not expected. He and Lauren had been dealing with financial pressure. They were trying to make some difficult decisions. And Michael believed getting more involved with Evelyn's home would give everyone more security. Evelyn listened quietly. Part of her understood. She knew life could become complicated. She knew families sometimes faced difficult seasons. But another part of her felt a deep sadness. Because Michael had not come to her and said, "Mom, I need help." Instead, he had come to her and said, "Mom, trust me." I have learned that some of the hardest family moments happen when people choose silence because they are afraid of the answer. Michael was not a stranger trying to enter Evelyn's life. He was her son. And that made everything more complicated. Because Evelyn was now facing two truths at the same time. Michael may have been worried. But Evelyn had still been left out of decisions about her own future. The next morning, Evelyn opened the folder again. This time, she was not only looking for what the document said. She was looking for what Michael had not told her. And hidden inside those pages was a detail that would change the entire story. Evelyn had expected the document to answer her questions. Instead, it created a new one. She sat at her kitchen table with the papers spread out in front of her. This time, she was not reading like a mother. She was reading like someone who needed to understand what had happened. Near the bottom of one page, she noticed a name she had not seen before. A company. Not Michael. Not Lauren. A company connected to financial planning. Evelyn picked up her phone and searched the name. The more she learned, the more she understood why Michael had been so careful with his words. The document was not only about making things easier for her. It was connected to a larger plan. A plan that involved using the value of the home as part of future financial decisions. Evelyn leaned back in her chair. For a moment, she said nothing. Because suddenly, the conversation she overheard between Michael and Lauren made sense. The pressure. The urgency. The reason they wanted everything arranged quickly. But one question remained. Why had Michael not simply asked for her help? That question stayed with Evelyn longer than anything else. Because she would have listened. She had always listened. When Michael needed help with his first car payment, she helped. When he moved away for work, she supported him. When he struggled through difficult years, she stood beside him. So why had he decided that a conversation was harder than a signature? That evening, Michael came by the house. Evelyn placed the documents on the table between them. Michael, I need you to explain something. He looked at the papers. Then he looked at her. What did you find? Evelyn noticed the question. Not. What are you talking about? Not. Did something happen? He already knew there was something to find. I found out this was connected to more than helping me, she said. Michael became quiet. For several seconds, he looked down at the table. Then he admitted that he had hoped to solve everything before worrying Evelyn. He said he thought he was protecting her from stress. Evelyn listened. But this time, she did not let the conversation move away from the most important point. Michael, you made a decision about my home before you made a decision with me. Those words changed the room. Because for the first time, Michael understood what his mother had been trying to say. This was not only about paperwork. It was about being included. I have learned that families often remember the moments someone gets upset. But they forget the moments before that. The moments when someone felt unheard. The moments when a person quietly wondered if their place in the family had changed. Evelyn did not leave that conversation with a perfect answer. But she left knowing one thing. She needed to find out exactly what Michael had signed her name into. And the next step would reveal something even more difficult. The document was not the only thing Michael had kept from her. The next morning, Evelyn Parker made a decision. She was going to ask for everything. Not because she wanted a fight. Not because she wanted to prove Michael wrong. Because she had spent too many days trying to understand a situation where everyone seemed to know more than she did. Evelyn called David Collins again. This time, she brought every document she had. David carefully reviewed the papers one more time. Then he pointed to a section near the back. Evelyn, this part is important. She leaned forward. The page explained that Michael's involvement was not only about helping with daily responsibilities. It gave him influence over future decisions connected to the property. Evelyn looked at the words. Then she looked away. Because suddenly, she remembered something Michael had said. Mom, this is just to make things easier. But easier for whom? That question stayed with her. David explained that the document did not mean Evelyn had no choices. But it did mean she needed to be careful. She needed to understand every step before agreeing to anything else. For the first time in weeks, Evelyn felt like she was standing on solid ground. Not because she had all the answers, but because she finally had the information. That afternoon, she asked Michael to come over. When he arrived, Evelyn placed the documents on the table. "Michael, I need you to be honest with me." He looked at her. "I have been honest." Evelyn nodded slowly. "Then tell me everything you know about these papers." Michael sat quietly. The room felt different. This was not the same conversation they had before. This time, Evelyn was not asking for permission to understand her own life. She was asking for the truth. Michael admitted that he had hoped to handle the situation before involving her in every detail. He said he thought too many questions would make her anxious. Evelyn listened. Then she asked the question she had been holding on to. "Did you ever consider asking me what I wanted?" Michael did not answer right away. And that silence hurt more than she expected. Because Evelyn realized something. The biggest problem was not the paperwork. The biggest problem was that her son had started making plans for a future where her voice was missing. I have seen families repair difficult moments. But it usually begins when someone finally stops explaining and starts listening. A person can have good intentions. A person can believe they are helping. But respect means allowing another person to have a choice. Evelyn did not know what would happen next. She did not know whether Michael would understand. She did not know whether their relationship would ever feel the same again. But she knew one thing. She would no longer sign anything simply because someone she loved asked her to. And before the week was over, Evelyn would discover one final piece of information. The reason Michael was so desperate to control the future was not only about the house. Evelyn thought the hardest part was learning what Michael had done. She was wrong. The hardest part was learning why. 2 days after their conversation, Evelyn received a call from David Collins. There was another detail in the paperwork. A detail Michael had never mentioned. David explained that the property was connected to a larger financial plan Michael and Lauren had been considering. They were not only thinking about Evelyn's home. They had already started making plans around what the home could provide for their own future. And that was the part Evelyn struggled to understand. The problem was not that Michael needed help. The problem was that he had started building a solution before asking her if she wanted to be part of it. Evelyn sat quietly as she listened. Because suddenly, many small moments began to make sense. The urgency. The extra questions about the house. The conversations about making changes. The reason Michael kept saying everything needed to be simpler. He was not only worried about his mother living alone. He was also worried about his own situation. And that realization hurt Evelyn in a way she did not expect. Not because she wanted her son to struggle. A mother never wants that. But because she realized he had placed her inside a plan before he had invited her into a conversation. That evening, Evelyn asked Michael to come over one more time. This time, she did not place the papers on the table. She placed a cup of coffee in front of him. Just like she had done hundreds of times before. "Michael," she said quietly, "I need to ask you something." He looked at her. "Did you come to me because you needed my help?" Michael looked down. The silence answered before he did. "Finally," he said. "I was trying to protect everyone." Evelyn nodded. She believed him. That was what made the situation so painful. Because she knew Michael was not sitting there thinking he was hurting his mother. He believed he was solving a problem. But Evelyn had learned something important. A person can have good intentions and still make someone else feel invisible. "Michael," she said, "you spent so much time trying to protect me from stress that you forgot to include me." He looked at his mother. And for the first time, he seemed to understand. The problem was not only the document. It was the distance that had grown between them. I have seen families survive difficult moments. But survival does not come from pretending nothing happened. It comes from being willing to look at the truth. Evelyn still loved her son. That never changed. But she also understood something she had forgotten. Love does not require someone to give up their voice. The next morning, Evelyn made the final decision about the document. She would not let fear decide her future. She would not let guilt decide either. She would make the choice herself. And that choice would determine whether her home remained a place filled with memories, or became the place where she finally learned to stand up for herself. The next morning, Evelyn Parker sat at the same kitchen table where this story had started. The same table where Michael placed the document. The same table where she had signed because she believed her son was protecting her. But this time, Evelyn was not holding a pen. She was holding the choice. After speaking with David Collins, Evelyn made her decision. She would not move forward with any plan she did not fully understand. She would not allow anyone, even someone she loved, to decide her future without her. When Michael arrived, Evelyn placed the documents in front of him. "I love you," she said. Michael looked surprised. "I know. But loving you does not mean I stop making my own decisions." The room became quiet. Because those words were not angry. They were not meant to hurt him. They were simply the truth. Evelyn explained that she understood why he was worried. She understood that he wanted security. She understood that he believed he was helping. But she needed him to understand something too. Her home was not just a financial asset. It was her life. It was where she raised him. It was where she shared decades with Robert. It was where she had built a future with her own hands. Michael looked around the kitchen. The same kitchen where he had grown up. And for the first time, he saw what his mother had been trying to protect. Not just a house. A sense of belonging. The paperwork was changed. The decisions about Evelyn's home returned to Evelyn. But the conversation between mother and son was not repaired in one afternoon. Some things take time. Trust is like a piece of furniture in an old home. It can be repaired. But the cracks still tell a story. And after all these years of listening to family stories, I have learned one thing. The deepest family wounds are not always created by people who stop caring. Sometimes they are created by people who care, but forget to listen. Evelyn kept her home. But more importantly, she kept her voice. And from that day forward, Evelyn still welcomed Michael into her home. She still loved her son. But she also learned something she would never forget. Love could open the door. But trust meant making sure she still had the key. She learned that accepting help does not mean surrendering control. And Michael learned that protecting someone does not mean making every decision for them. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give the people we love is not an answer. It is respect. And as Evelyn sat on her front porch that evening, looking at the flowers Robert planted years before, she felt something she had not felt in weeks. Peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because she finally knew her own voice still mattered. Thank you for staying with Evelyn's story until the end. Now I want to ask you something. If you were Evelyn, would you forgive Michael because you believed his intentions were good? Or would you feel that making a decision about your future without asking you crossed a line that could not be ignored? Share your thoughts in the comments. I would truly like to know how you see this situation.